My film is called Gnawbone, the film. So if you Google it, it'll come up Gnawbone, the film, because there is actually a town called Gnawbone in Indiana. And that's kind of where we got the name from it. The film's about basically a young boy goes on a camping trip. Something happens to his parents. He goes on a camping trip with his grandfather, and something happens. His grandfather dies. He thinks a monster killed his grandfather, and flash forward 10, 15 years later, he's in college, and he's still having therapy for that episode. And with 80s horror movie logic, let's go back out in the woods and face our fears is what the psychiatrist tells him. So he has to be convinced with all of his friends to go out in the woods, and the professor was going to go out and secretly tape them and see how he reacts in the woods and everything, and kind of mayhem ensues. So I grew up in the 80s, so watching 80s horror films, I mean, some of my first memories was going to, drive-ins and seeing double bills in Seymour, Indiana. I watched some of my first, like, Friday the 13th 1 and 2 there. I watched The Thing there, stuff like that. And I was like 12 years old, pretty impressionable. And then just renting VHS horror when I was young, going in on a Friday night and getting a little tag off the wall for some horror you've never seen before, probably produced by two people that have no business making a movie, from some business venture that, and all those horrors just kind of exploded. And they would make really cool cover art, and sometimes you'd find a hidden gem, sometimes it'd just be a total piece of junk. So, it was kind of fun when you were little doing that. I read Fangoria magazine, stuff like that. So I was really into horror, but just in movies in general. So, I've always been a cinephile since I was little. I actually teach visual arts now in a high school, and I also teach film studies and filmmaking. So we make short films, and kids watch films and see how it's an art form. So the exact same thing I said earlier, it's just stuff I remember. I mean, it was really cool seeing some of the box art, and that they would spend sometimes more money on the box art than they would the sound guy because it's important as a first thing to look at to pull you in. So, Photoshop and floating heads, you see those on discs everywhere now. So, and that's been that way since probably the late, mid 90s, I think is when I started noticing that. So me being an art teacher, I was like, I'll just make a painting. I did it basically in one night, and because I paint pretty fast. And then we used Photoshop to take that painting and kind of make it into, the cover. Yeah, basically, most of the horror tropes from the 80s all involve the same formulaic type, characterizations, and we wanted to use those same types, but kind of flip them. So that's where you have like an African American male as a main character, as opposed to a white male or a white female. And then like the jerk in the film actually has a tender kind of emotional scene with his girlfriend, and saying that he's basically just playing that role because that's what's expected of him. It's what people know him by, growing up. So we wanted to show those tropes, but then kind of flip them a little bit. And I think, back in the 80s, there was very little motivation. It was usually like, I'm fixing up a summer camp, or I'm, we're all just going to go camping and partying this weekend. So we threw those in there, but we thought, we need something as a jump start to why they're there. We thought it'd be cool to bring a psychological trauma, and originally we were going to write it more of a psychological kind of thriller, and maybe make it seem like Tommy, it was all in his mind, it was a dream, or he was the killer actually, and there was no monster. Then it was like, hell no, let's just make it a straight up monster movie. And we just still use some of those same ideas a little bit, but that's kind of how it came about. I think because when you see people doing indie film, they usually do the slasher so they'll have a killer and usually some kind of mask and everything. But I always loved like creatures and stuff, so we thought Godzilla, stuff like that, even though it's a man in a suit, just for a little bit you dispense that reality just to be like, oh, this is cool to look at, this is something cool to do. So we really wanted to use as many practical effects, all of our special effects are things that we came up with and did ourselves. We didn't hire out on anything except for the actual suit. It was made by a friend of mine that lives north of us, and he has his own company, and he actually helped. I drew it out and designed it, and he actually made it, to fit a guy that did the monster scene. So, that's kind of the reason we did it. I just wanted something different than slasher. It was our first film, so that's kind of how it came about. We knew it had to look somewhat humanoid, so we could fit our person into it, and our budget was only $5,500. So, we couldn't come up with like great big elaborate Jim Henson type puppetry to make the monster move and everything. I really wanted something that had teeth and bone kind of growing out of it. So like my initial sketches, a friend of mine named Trent Persinger, who also did the editing and stuff like that, we started sketching out different ways it would look and everything, and just came up with like gnarly like teeth that came out of the skull, and like bones that were kind of like withered away, and like scars and everything. And it kind of evolved into this. It's not quite the way we drew it out, but it's pretty close. So the monster took, when we first started, we were still scripting stuff out, and I designed all the stuff drawing wise in probably a couple days with all the sketches that we did. And then when I sent it to Scott Blake at Your Dream Creations, he basically probably took about 2 or 3 weeks to start forming it and everything. And I think we got it within 2 or 3 months. And that's when we were actually doing like principal like acting, submissions and stuff like that. So we had plenty of time to do that. If you put the shoot days back to back, it's about 15 days. But because it was our first film and everybody else had, multiple actual real jobs, and my DP, he actually is a former student of mine, and I got him into it, and he went off to college, and then, he's worked in the film industry for probably about 4 years now, and he goes all over the world. So it's hard to nail him down. And he had a lot of the equipment and everything, so we basically relied on his schedule. So it took about a year to film, 15 days. It was probably 6 months, but once again, that was like me and Trent, trying to get together and get our schedules together to where we could edit, and we'd pass the computer off, and I'd edit a while, and he'd go back and edit a while, but he did the main editing. He's really good at like color grading and stuff like that. So we often joked after we got well into the production that it would be funnier if we actually videotaped everything that went on behind the scenes and made a documentary on the making of Gnawbone, and it would probably be way more successful than Gnawbone will ever have a chance to get, because like just things happening where, like for example, one time we were taping scenes. I had to borrow a big truck and a trailer to tape all the driving scenes. And what we did is we put the camera in the back of the truck and the cars on the trailer, and then we had the sound guy in the car with them, and we were videotaping, and we were done with the whole day, and the tailgate was down, and the DP, he was like, okay, we're done, take a ride up here. So I start to take a right. I didn't know you still had the tailgate down. When you turn, the tongue of the tailgate hit the tongue of the wagon and dented the whole thing in, tore it up. That was like a $300 expense because it wasn't my vehicle. So we had to get that go find a new one, and get it repainted and everything. So stuff like that was crappy. But as far as good times, there was stuff like, there's a scene in there where Gnawbone's literally lops somebody's head off. I'll just tell you that. He literally rips their head off with his hand, with a swipe of his hand. And the guy that we had playing Gnawbone couldn't be there that night, so a friend of one of the actresses was skinny and kind of tall, so he was in there, but he wasn't very athletic. And the other guy was like a parkour guy. So he's supposed to run, and there was a hole in the ground, but with so much fog and haze, you couldn't see the hole. And he was running, and he went to hit the dummy head that we had, and he stepped in the hole, and you just see like Gnawbone running, and all of a sudden he flops, and all the fog like goes around him like that. It was comical. So there's a lot of goofy things like that went on, but nobody got killed, so we're good. I did all the practical effects, so yeah, everything with the head and the spine rip and everything. Actually, the spine rip we filmed. It was our very first shot, and we filmed it, and there was a whole crew on set. It was probably, I say a whole crew, but there's like 8 of us, so that was our whole crew, and then like the 2 or 3 actors that were in the scene, and we filmed it, and it looked horrible on film. Like I was like, oh, it's so disappointing. And the spine didn't look right, and just the way we filmed it, just no blood coming out. It just did not look good. And everybody was like, oh yeah, that looks good. And it took us like 4 or 5 hours to film it. Everybody went home. So I was like, this is horrible. I said, we've already got the shot with the actor screaming and everything. I said, you and I was talking to Trent, I said, let's you and I go out in the woods and retape that scene. He said, how are we gonna do it? So I made a fake dummy body, used the same exact clothes that the actor was wearing, made a new spine, or got a new spine, made all the back prosthetics and all the blood packs and everything, put them on there, used some condoms filled with blood, taped them to the body, taped them to the spine, and then I was holding like an air compressor fire extinguisher off to the side, full of blood, had it primed to go all the way up. Now the thing was, we didn't have the camera, we didn't have our DP, we didn't have the actors, we didn't have people lighting, so we took like a whiteboard or something to flash some light on it. He got into the costume, Trent did, the editor. He got into the costume of the Gnawbone. He was gonna pull the spine. I was videotaping with like an HD camera. It was 1080p, it looks a lot different than 4K, but it still worked in the film. So I was videotaping, I was down like this, and I was holding the blood pump on one hand. I was like, okay, we have one shot at this. And I was like, and action. He starts pulling it. I start pumping. First time, it looked perfect. And that's what's in the film. So, no, not right now. We've tried to put them in about 4 or 5, and you're the first ones that accepted. We've had two say no, but they were bigger film festivals. And one thing I'm learning from talking to people in the industry, it's sometimes hard to get into the bigger ones because they take stuff that already has a little bit of marketing push, or and we haven't had any of that yet. So I do have a producer out of Kentucky that he's done a couple of movies that have, got a little bit of buzz, and he's got one movie that's going to be on Blumhouse, which is Jason Blum, so, he's got a little bit of weight right now, so he's going to help push it a little bit coming up. So, and that's what I've seen quite a few up in our area, like Horror Hound had one, and Days of the Dead had one, and then Fright Night Film Festival, I think, up in Louisville had one, Chicago Horror Festival, and I noticed there was the same 5 movies in all of them. So, I wouldn't say it's who you know, but sometimes it's who you know, and how much push you've got. So, but we're just starting. I've already met my goals. My goal was, let's see if we could have fun and make one. We made one. I wanted to premiere at my hometown. We premiered at our hometown. That was really cool. And we wanted to get like a short run of DVDs we could sell. We've done that, so everything's from here on's cake. So.